Shirley Adams for Sewing Connection, Series 14, Program 9. Lethbridge is a lovely little city where the natives joke that the wind blows so constantly, everyone leans a little. Actually, I lean toward the warm, friendly people who live there. A unique feature of the area is the swelling of coulees, just hundreds of little hills giving the landscape a surrealistic aura, like a Dali painting. Well, what I have from Lethbridge is influenced by what I saw there. Now, was it the big bridge there? Because if it's Lethbridge, it has to have a bridge. And no, it wasn't really. Was it the coulees? Well, maybe, because I do have a little trapunto going on today, so it's all those little swelling mounds that look a lot like that. But mainly what it was is the jewelry I bought while I was there. The bracelet and the earrings, they have these hexagons on them, and I thought, isn't that a nice little design? Let's put it on something. So what I started out with is in the closet. You know, a lot of you have told me you really don't need anything new, but maybe you need to upgrade something that you already have, and that's what I did. This outfit I'm wearing, or the top at least, you probably saw a few series ago, and I don't think I've worn it since then, so I thought this is a good candidate, let's do that. Now, the last time I wore it, I had this wide belt with it, and it seems like the wider I get, the narrower my belts get. So when I drop the belts all together, you know I'm at my widest. Well, anyway, this time around it's a narrow belt, but let me show you how that original design came about that I'm wearing. It started, of course, with a basic, which is the easy way to go. And what I did then to that basic patterner is take off this standard arm's eye here and shoulder and just substitute it for one that is all one piece, so that I have these kimono sleeves instead of set-in sleeves. So you simply put this one on, and you set it for your bust measurement where it's already set, so I won't bother, but that's just moving it in and out if I want it to be wider or narrower. So that's a simple little operation. And this is all it is. When I cut this out then, I did a little bit of extra in that I added out here at the side, about 4 inches, because I wanted this to come down a little bit lower, and I wanted a hem on it too. So I added about 4 inches there at the sleeves. And at the front, because I wanted this big overlap, I added about 3 inches when I cut it out. So it was just cutting it over here and adding seam allowances all around, and it's that easy. The back is the very same, except on the back it's always a higher neck, and so you add this little inset to the back that makes it a higher neckline. And the easiest way really is not to figure out if you want it a little bit lower, to cut in advance how much lower. What I really did is just cut it out like the patterner, and then after I took it off the fabric, then I trimmed it down a little bit lower since it's a slightly cutaway neckline. So very easy to do. Facings are, of course, just a duplicate of the outside piece. So the facing I would have started here and cut around, and then take the patterner off and just cut a facing there. So very simple to do this type of thing. Well, in order to make these hexagons, what it is, of course, is a 6-sided figure. So the easiest way to make them is take some piece of paper. I have one of those little telephone notes here, and it's just folded in half first, and then you fold approximately a third and just adjust it until you do have exact thirds there so that it comes out just right. Cut off the jagged corners at the bottom, and you have a hexagon. It's that simple. Or any kind of a geometric figure, because any of them would be very easy, of course. Now I have the stickum touching each other, so there, have it apart. So anyway, this is how I started, with this simple little pattern. And after I had that done, then it was just taking a little straight edge and drawing lines every 1/4 inch inside, so that I had lots of these little hexagons. And then I thought, well, the easiest way is if I separate them. So I traced each of those little ones and have from the smallest to the largest, and a variety of these hexagons I'm going to have on my top. And instead of drawing them all over, it is really much simpler to just have these little patterns, pin them on as you're sewing everything, and not have any markings then to worry about being erased. So I'll just do a little sewing after a while, but I decided to do a combination of things here. Not only do I have a lot of these hexagons stitched, both front and back on the bodice, but also I have some appliqued out of the skirt fabric. So let's first of all see how to do that at the ironing board and do some hexagons of a couple of different sorts here. One of them, I tried it two ways. I thought, okay, there have to be a couple of ways to do it. Let's see which way's easiest. And one of them was simply folding over the edges. And this is just a matter of folding it, finger pressing as you go, folding about 1/4 inch over. And once I have that finger pressed everywhere, kind of push it down with my nail or crease it down. And once I have that finger pressed, then it's going to be a very easy matter to press it. So let me get this finger pressed a little bit more, and then we can press. Okay, what makes it nice with an iron and not worrying about your fingers getting a steam burn is that with a faceplate on it, that iron really isn't hot, and so it's very easy to put down here and manipulate until you actually press the steam button, and by then your finger's away, so it's not a problem at all. And I'll do a couple of more sides and give it a shot of steam. And so whether they're larger or smaller, this is still a pretty easy thing to do. And it's getting a little warm. I think I'll turn on the exhaust and cool it off. Okay, and we've got a hexagon, and it's all hemmed under, so that one wasn't too difficult, as you can see. But then I thought I'd try another way, too, to see if it makes it any easier. And my other way was to stitch a lightweight, fusible interfacing to the right sides together, actually, to a piece of this fabric. And I'm just going to cut it off, and as I'm cutting, I kind of cut the corners, because it turns better, it turns more gracefully if you have those corners disappeared. So every time I come to a corner, I'll cut it off. And then the way you turn this, since it's stitched all the way around, is to just cut a little slit in the back, turn it through that, and poke out all the corners. And by the time I did this, I decided, you know, that first way was a whole lot easier. You then turn it right side out, and you have to poke out each of those 6 corners. This actually took a lot longer to do than simply turning under the seam allowances. Therefore, I didn't do it this way. If you choose to do it this way, though, here are some things you can do. While it's all open like this, you could put a little fiber fill in it. You could stuff it and make it be puffy. So that's one thing you can do, and then press it down. You could also, if you wanted to, instead of putting the right sides of the interfacing and the fashion fabric together, you really could put the wrong side of the interfacing to the right side of the fashion fabric. When you turn it, then the glue would be on the outside, and then you could put it directly on your garment and press it in place, and it would stay. You'd fuse it to it. So there are some variations here. You figure out what's the easiest way for you to do it, or what your preference is. And then when you have a whole lot of these done in various sizes, then it's time to go over to the machine and do some stitching. But first, let's decide what we're going to put them on. What I had was just a piece of fabric here. It didn't have really any interfacing in. And I thought, I'm going to do this a little bit more efficiently than stuffing all these later. I'm going to instead just stitch it over fiber fill, so it has a little gentle stuffing that way automatically, just like those little hills all over Lethbridge that are stuffed. So what I did was just take some fiber fill. This is quilt batting, but it's not a firm bat. It's just the loose fiber fill. And so actually what's done here, because I didn't want it to be real puffy, I just wanted a little bit of a hint of depth here, so I put a little bit on. And after I had a little bit of this on the area where I was going to work, And this interfacing then isn't going to go all over, nor is the stuffing. It's just in the area where I'm actually going to stitch. That means out here in the sleeves, I wasn't going to do anything there. Therefore, don't make it puff at all. So just this area where it's going to be, put some interfacing over it and pressed it down. Now what this interfacing is going to do, I'm going to take a little bit out because my interfacing piece isn't really big enough to cover it all. What I'm going to do here is, of course, this interfacing will stick to the fiber fill that I have there, and just around the edges then it'll stick to the actual fabric. So by the time we get that pressed here, you can see the stuffing is just going to be in the center. And so it's ready to go do some stitching. See, it just puffs a little bit where I wanted it to, and right now it doesn't look too wonderful. But by the time you stitch on it, then it brings it down and gets to looking very nice. So I'll take my patterns with me, and I'll take the hexagons that I have ready. And this one I hadn't pressed. I might use it, so I'll just go ahead and press it. Just be sure that if you do put the interfacing the other way, you don't press it with the workable side up. Okay, over here then we're going to have to decide what kind of stitching we're going to use for this. And I think the easiest way is to first of all just do some stitching, just the outline of these hexagons. And then after we have some of the stitching, then do a little applique later. So I might decide what kind of a design I want. Perhaps I want one this size right here. And if that's the case, then I'm just going to put a pin there to hold it in place. Again, don't draw any lines. And then it's deciding what angle you want these at. I decided on mine to put them all at the same angle because, you know, things evolve. I didn't really decide this at the outset, but things kind of evolve. And after I started working on it, I thought, okay, let's have them all at the same angle because then I can do multiple lines for each one. And it would complicate it if I overlap them or if I put them at different angles. So I kept it simple by just putting them about this far apart, about a 1/4 inch apart, and arranging them however I wanted to, and just put pin in each one to hold it. When I start stitching, I can take that pin out eventually, but this is easy to simply stitch it around the outside and not have to draw any lines. Now, as far as how you're going to stitch it or what kind of a stitch you're going to use, you could just use a straight stitch if you wanted to, and this time I've set the machine down. I usually use it probably up as a free arm. This time I set it down because it's going to be easier to use as a flat bed. So it's set down and the little inset is here so that it has everything nice and flat. And because I'm going to turn so many corners, I also would like to have down here the knee lift, and have to look where, okay, here it is. I'm used to having it in plain sight. Okay, with the knee lift down here then I can manipulate that and keep both my hands for turning the fabric, so that's going to make it a little easier. Okay, and then do I want a straight stitch around? Probably on a scrap of fabric it's a good idea to try it first to see what's going to be to your liking. I know what a straight stitch looks like, so I won't bother with that. But I have a couple of choices here that I might like to do. I might like to have this triple stretch stitch, so I'll see what that looks like. And what it's going to do is go backward and forward. So this might be one choice, and what this does really is just give a heavier line all around. You could also use heavier thread in the top going through the needle, and that would do the job. I'm going to press another one here and see how I like 7. Okay, 7 seems to move on faster. It's bigger stitches. I'll just use 7. And go over here and go ahead and start stitching my hexagons. And where you start, I'm going to want the needle down position so that I know where it's going to stop each time to make sure I'm on a corner as I turn. Okay, whoops. You have to remember also that it back stitches, so that one backed up. Next corner I come to, then I want to remember to either stop a little short of it or plan how it's going to work. And this went just a speck too far. I'm going to back it up so that stitch won't actually show, and move it up so that it's right there at the corner, and put the needle down. and take another stitch. Whoops, it's backing up. You have to plan this, don't you? And you turn the corner and go down the next side. And this stretch stitch, of course, just goes back and forth, so you have to figure out exactly when it's going to be the right time to turn when you get to the corner. And if it goes back now and then, and it's slightly out of line, it'll never show by the time you get it finished, and it's going to be okay. Well, anyway, you can see how it works. And this is kind of fun, and you can just keep adding more and more hexagons, one more stitch, as you feel like it. And when you get all finished, you just take the paper off and you've got a hexagon there. If you want to, and what I've done is go around several more times inside, just made smaller and smaller ones. So depending on how much time you want to put into it, these are just simple things to do. Well, after I got all those done, then I also did a little applique on some of them, and that was a slightly different stitch. That one was an applique stitch, and let's find one, and I'm going to use, this 27 here, and I would put this hexagon on and do the applique, and that is where it stitches along the outside, and then it comes over and grabs it here and there. You can see how it stitches along the outside, and about every third stitch or fourth it goes in, and it looks like a little hand applique. And so it's kind of a neat stitch that you need to try. And again, turn the corner when you get there and applique the whole thing. Well, this is an easy thing to do, and it's just sort of mindless work and very relaxing, and you might like to try it. Well, I'd like to show you something on a model, and this is a similar idea, but instead of hexagons, what she has, this is Bobby Culbert of Santa Fe, and what she has is a lot of circles. Now, hers aren't padded. They could be. They aren't padded, but I think this is just so interesting. The idea is a repetition of geometric figures, the same as I was doing. And even though hers are not padded, aren't they pretty? She has all different sizes and different colors in the red, black, and white. And not only did she do this all over the outside of her vest, but also on the inside, because this actually is a reversible vest and she could wear it either way. And so it's just a pretty idea. I want to offer you a lot of ideas. This time is what we're trying for. Now, I'd like you to look at somebody else's on a model. And this one is on Marion Ellers of Houston. There are two of them here. They're both by Marion. And what Marion has done is some of the same padded work, the trapunto look, except that she has some really pretty little designs going. And what she's done is just follow the print of the fabric. And as the print had little hills and valleys here and there, so has hers as it's stitched. And I'd like to show you how to do a little bit of that because it's such fun. Notice before we leave the models that that one is the very same thing I'm wearing, just with the same sleeves and so on. She's taken a little pleat in the sleeve, but just look how pretty that metallic stitching is. Well, I'm going to show you how to do a little bit of that, and what it is really just a straight stitch, but it's free motion stitching. So I'm going to go back to straight stitch, and I'm going to have to take the partition out of here that makes it a flat bed, and I'm going to have to bring it up so that I can do a little stitching, because I want that. Well, I don't even have to bring it up. I'll leave it down there. But what I wanted is to have the free motion going, so I wanted to put the feed dog down. I will too bring it up because it's going to be easier to show you if it's all up here flat. And it would help if I would take the arm off there. Okay. And this is the idea. See how this is the same way that she did hers, just leaving that area free and doing a lot of stitching around the outside. So I'm going to come around here. There's a slight, there's a design there in the fabric, a very free, a slight design. It looks kind of like the coolies of Lethbridge, really. But I'm just going to do a little stitching here, and of course I would use it in a different color. But the reason I'm using a contrast here is so that you can see it. And this is exactly what Marion did on hers, just going back and forth like this. And actually, if you have a very big hoop, this might be easier to do with the flatbed machine instead of the free arm, but it doesn't seem to be hampering me at all, so it really doesn't matter that much. So it's just going back and forth and filling in the space. And you don't fill in any space where you want it to be raised, where you want it to show.
So I would fill in all this and then just leave the magenta parts free. And doesn't that give a pretty effect? So by the time you get all this stitching done, you don't really even realize that there is any fiber fill inside that makes it puff up. I'll take this out so you can see it a little better, but you can see this is going to be puffy, and especially you can see that once I release it. This is going to be all puffy where I did not stitch, and yet it's flat where I did stitch. So it makes something very pretty, and you can use it either in colors that harmonize with it, or maybe go a little glitzy and put some metallic in, but it makes it just a really nice design. Now, wouldn't this be a good way to jazz up something you already have in your closet and give it a little different look? So this is one way, and this is just with cottons. Hers was also on a, maybe something a little dressier than a cotton, but a very pretty fabric. Here's another one that I'm starting on and haven't finished yet. But what this was is also a fabric, just no definite design, just little splotches here and there, and they kind of give the feeling of a flower when they're all finished. And here I was doing a similar thing, the little stitches back and forth around there, but I was going in smaller little loops around because it's a more delicate fabric. It's a chiffon really, and so it seemed to need more delicate stitches on it and not quite as large as those that I did on the cotton. So I'm just going to leave those lumps all over and stitch around it. Now there's another way you can do it. Instead of putting that fiber fill in initially, as I did here, you could also, if you preferred, just stitch on the two fabrics, just the two of them down there, and stuff it later, which is genuine trapunto and usually the way it would be done. Well, here's what that would look like. After you have it all stitched between the two fabrics, then you cut a little slit there and just poke some fiber fill in with whatever will do the job. A pencil eraser is sometimes a good thing to use to push it in here, or you might start with the tip of scissors if that doesn't start it just right. But the fact that the friction of that eraser that kind of holds, well, these scissors are doing just fine, or these clippers. But anyway, whatever areas you do want to be raised, to be elevated, then you could just stuff the fiber fill in there and make that pretty little design. So this is another way you can do it. Now, another way still that I'm going to show you over here is one that's an automatic stitch. This one I did as I was doing something else. The machine did it, I didn't. And it's simply a quilting design that I've used. And what I had here was some padding in the back of it. Actually, it was a fleece that I had on the back side of it. I already had fused the fleece to it when I did all this decorative stitching on it, this quilting stitch, and then it was all finished when it got through. But you could also, with this one, pad each of those little circular areas by cutting little slits and stuffing it from the back side to make them more pronounced if you want to, and that would be a really pretty look on it. I'd like you to see another model with something else that one of our viewers has done, and this is June Grieg, and she's from St. Louis in this olive dress, and she's done something really pretty that is another possibility. Now what June has done is stitch a couple of interlocking figure eights and then stuff them afterwards. And the way she has done this, both on the back and the front, is to just stitch around, and of course this had to be drawn first so that you figure out, okay, where do I not want to cross any lines, where do I not want to stitch it. So you have to figure this very carefully and stitch it all, or draw it all first. What I've done here though is just draw this figure eight on the fabric. I don't have it interlocking at all. And this you would stitch around, and it would be easier to stitch this around if I had my original foot on instead of the embroidery foot. And also it would be easier to stitch this if I did not have free motion. So I'm going to put the feed dog back in play. And then as I stitch around this, just with the straight stitch, and I'm not going to do the whole thing, I'll just come back. I'll just raise it here and come back the same way so I can show you how to stuff it. Okay. Now we're having tubes instead of having big areas as we did with the fiber fill. So the stuffing of this is going to be a little bit different. And how that would be is to just take a tapestry needle and put some fat yarn in. I didn't have any fat yarn with me, so I have 4 strands of it. I just put that through. Now the tapestry needle, of course, has a really big eye there, so all these threads can go through easily. And then if your fabric is porous enough that you can go through, fine. If it isn't, cut a little slit there so that you can come through, because this needle is not sharp. It has that blunt point. And then you just go through with this. And even if it curves a little bit, your needle will curve. If it curves too drastically, wherever it's too drastic, come on up, come out of that fabric with the needle and pull it through, and then to finish going around the curve, you can just push the needle in again and keep going. So I'd pull this yarn until it's almost out, and then I'd simply go back in and go the rest of the curve around. And that makes a really pretty raised place, just as June's did. So there are several ways here you can get that look, that stuffed, that trapunto look, making it look like the coolies of Lethbridge. And please get up to Canada sometime and visit that pretty little city. It's very nice. Well, these are just some more things that you might do in your wardrobe. I just like to offer you a little bit of all sorts of possibilities in this series. Well, I'll certainly go visit Lethbridge again, and if the Alberta Clipper blows in, I'll need something warm and furry. Now, it could even be colorful. Come join me next time to see some posh pastel furs.